Welcome to Bedtime Stories for Grown-Ups, in which nothing much happens. You feel good, and then you fall asleep. All stories are written and read by me, Catherine Nicolai, with audio engineering by Bob Wittersheim. Nothing Much Happens is a proud member of the Snoozecast podcast network. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter for some extra coziness. If you need a bit more nothing much in your life, head over to nothingmuchhappens.com. So many of you have told me that you've turned first this, then that, into a daily mantra, or that you start your day by looking for 3 good things. And it's inspired us to create some special pieces with those words. Order yours today, and I'll wrap it up with my own 2 hands. Tuck in a thank you note and send it out to you. Now let me say a little about how this podcast works. I'm going to read you a simple, soothing bedtime story. It's mostly about mood and feeling, so you don't have to keep track of anything as you listen. Just let your mind follow along with the sound of my voice. This will keep it from wandering, and before you know it, you'll be dropping off to sleep. I'll tell the story twice, and I'll slow down a bit with the second telling. If you wake again later in the night, you could start the story over, or just think back to any part of the story you can remember, especially any part that felt cozy or relaxing. So many listeners have confirmed what I've been telling you all this time, that the more you listen, the more quickly you'll drop off, and the quality of your sleep will keep improving over time. Now, turn out your light. Slip down into your sheets and feel how cool and soft they are around you. Get your pillow in just the right spot and let your whole body relax. Let's take a deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Good. Do that again. Breathe in and out. Our story tonight is called At the Summer Fair, and it's a story about a yearly tradition and how it changes in the different summers of your life. It's also about plums taken from the icebox, a handmade cup wrapped in paper, and strolling along the river as the streetlights blink on above you. At the summer fair. As kids, we always went during the day, riding the rides and playing the games, eating pretzels with lines of yellow mustard squeezed on top, and blue snow cones that stained our lips. We didn't mind the heat, and ran from one booth to another, calling out to each other about where to go next. At some point, we'd be rounded up and taken home, dusty and exhausted, and still chattering about all the things we'd seen and done. Now, as grown-ups, we like to go in the late afternoon, as the sun was sinking behind the trees. The hottest part of the day behind us, and the breeze of evening starting to break through the midsummer air. We'd set out from home, hand in hand, and made our way toward the sound of the fair in the distance. In my childhood memory, the fairgrounds were huge, paths you could get lost in, and always a corner of the park that you hadn't explored. But now I saw that it had only ever been the green space of the city park and the gravel lot beside it, with a row of artists' booths stretching down along the riverfront. All along the edges of the fair were tall wooden bins, filled by a local orchard, with the ripe stone fruits of the season. Peaches and plums and nectarines and tiny yellow-orange apricots were heaped in sweet-smelling mounds. The fruit was so abundant at this point in the summer, and the orchard so generous, that you could just help yourself to anything that sounded good. Plums are my favorite, but if they aren't perfectly ripe, they can be terribly sour and hard to get your teeth through. We stopped to survey the offerings, and I found a couple small but soft and ripe-smelling plums. They had that frosted shimmer on their skins, with deep purple underneath. I slipped them into my pocket to eat later, maybe after a short stay in the fridge. It made me think suddenly of that brief, lovely poem by William Carlos Williams that goes, "This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me. They were delicious, so sweet, and so cold." We linked hands again and stepped into the heart of the fair. Kids ran and chased. Bunches of friends strolled on the midway, a teddy bear clamped under an arm, one at a booth somewhere along the way. The people watching was excellent. Here was an older couple watching from a bench, canes propped beside and a huge bag of popcorn between them, their hands bumping together as they reached in for another mouthful. Here was a grunt of teens. That is the collective noun for teenagers, a grunt, or alternatively, an attitude of teens. Boastful and merrily loud after a couple months of running free from school, holding court by the Ferris wheel. Here were 4 women who looked so much alike they must be sisters, each with long dark hair and bright shades of lipstick, having a good gossip, while an occasional kid would run up to ask for $1 or hand over a cast-off sweater. Lucky children, I thought, when you can turn as easily to an aunt as to your mom to have your shoelace tied. They won't know till they're older how sweet that is. We'd ridden the Ferris wheel lots back when we were teenagers ourselves, and we didn't need any teddy bears. and we weren't yet ready to sit on a bench and eat popcorn. So we walked past all of that and down to the booths of art and handmade things by the river. We went slowly, looking at silver rings set with polished stones, watercolors of some local landmarks, soaps and salves. I bought something good for mosquito bites. Tiny hand-bound books you could write stories in, and rows of ceramics. I'm a sucker for teacups and coffee mugs. However many I've got, I'd always like one more. And as I was looking, I got a little squeeze from the hand I was holding, which I knew meant, go on, pick out a good one. I found a squat little cup, the glaze a smooth bluish green, and with a broad spot at the top of the handle to rest your thumb. I pointed to it. It was paid for and wrapped up in yesterday's newspaper and tucked into my bag for tomorrow morning's tea. I'll have it with my plums, I thought. The sunlight was going, and the tall street lamps were coming on around us. We could turn home, and soon we would. But maybe we'd walk just a bit further, down along the river first. After all, in the course of a year, these summer nights were few and should be savored. Yes, let's walk a bit further. At the summer fair. As kids, we always went during the day, riding the rides and playing the games, eating pretzels with lines of yellow mustard squeezed on top, and blue snow cones that stained our lips. We didn't mind the heat and ran from one booth to another, calling out to each other about where to go next. At some point, we'd be rounded up and taken home, dusty and exhausted, and still chattering about all the things we'd seen and done. Now, as grown-ups, we like to go in the late afternoon, as the sun was sinking behind the trees, the hottest part of the day behind us, and the breeze of evening starting to break through the midsummer air. We'd set out from home hand in hand and made our way toward the sound of the fair in the distance. In my childhood memory, the fairgrounds were huge, paths you could get lost in, and always a corner of the park you hadn't explored. But now I saw that it had only ever been the green space of the city park and the gravel lot beside it, with a row of artists' booths stretching down along the riverfront. All along the edges of the fair were tall wooden bins filled by a local orchard with the ripe stone fruits of the season. Peaches and plums and nectarines and tiny yellow-orange apricots were heaped in sweet-smelling mounds. The fruit was so abundant at this point in the summer, and the orchard so generous, that you could just help yourself to anything that sounded good. Plums are my favorite. But if they aren't perfectly ripe, they can be terribly sour and hard to get your teeth through. We stopped to survey the offerings, and I found a couple small but soft and ripe-smelling plums. They had that frosted shimmer on their skins, with deep purple underneath. I slipped them into my pocket to eat later, maybe after a short stay in the fridge. It made me think suddenly of that brief, lovely poem by William Carlos Williams that goes, "This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me. They were delicious, so sweet, and so cold." We linked hands again and stepped into the heart of the fair. Kids ran and chased. Bunches of friends strolled on the midway. A teddy bear clamped under an arm, won at a booth somewhere along the way. The people watching was excellent. Here was an older couple, watching from a bench, canes propped beside, and a huge bag of popcorn between them, their hands bumping together as they reached in for another mouthful. Here was a grunt of teens. That is the collective noun for teenagers, a grunt, or alternatively, an attitude of teens. Boastful and merrily loud after a couple months of running free from school, holding court by the Ferris wheel. Here were 4 women who looked so much alike. They must be sisters, each with long dark hair and bright shades of lipstick, having a good gossip while an occasional kid would run up to ask for $1 or hand over a cast-off sweater. Lucky children, I thought, when you can turn as easily to an aunt as to your mom to have your shoelace tied. They won't know till they're older how sweet that is. We'd ridden the Ferris wheel lots back when we were teenagers ourselves, and we didn't need any teddy bears, and we weren't yet ready to sit on a bench and eat popcorn. So we walked past all of that and down to the booths of art and handmade things by the river. We went slowly, looking at silver rings set with polished stones, watercolors of some local landmarks, soaps and salves. I bought something good for mosquito bites. Tiny hand-bound books you could write stories in, and rows of ceramics. I'm a sucker for teacups and coffee mugs. However many I've got, I'd always like one more. And as I was looking, I got a little squeeze from the hand I was holding, which I knew meant, go on, pick out a good one. I found a squat little cup, the glaze a smooth bluish green, and with a broad spot at the top of the handle to rest your thumb. I pointed to it. It was paid for and wrapped up in yesterday's newspaper and tucked into my bag for tomorrow morning's tea. I'll have it with my plums, I thought. The sunlight was going, and the tall street lamps were coming on around us. We could turn home, and soon we would. But maybe we'd walk just a bit further, down along the river first. After all, in the course of a year, these summer nights were few and should be savored. Yes, let's walk a bit further. Sweet dreams. Welcome to Bedtime Stories for Everyone, in which nothing much happens. You feel good, and then you fall asleep. I'm Catherine Nicolai. I write and read everything you hear on Nothing Much Happens, with audio engineering by Bob Wittersheim. We give to a different charity each week, and this week we are giving to Midwest Small Breed Rescue. They are a volunteer-based rescue for small breed and mixed dogs, where they receive love and care until they find that special home to call their own. You can learn more about them in our show notes. For an ad-free and bonus-filled version of this show, and to support the work we do for just a dime a day, we hope you'll consider becoming a premium subscriber. There's a link in our notes, and Spotify and Apple users can click the handy join button right on our show page. The first month is on us. Just like you can condition your muscles, you can condition your brain to fall asleep and return to sleep more quickly and easily. And the good news is that all you need to do to accomplish this is to listen. The more regularly you use the show, the better. Most listeners report best results after about a month of regular use. I'll tell the story twice, and I'll go a little slower the second time through. If you wake in the night, don't hesitate to turn an episode right back on. Our story tonight is called Sidewalk Chalk, and it's a story about a journey through the park on a bright day. It's also about a cold drink from the coffee shop, a frog blinking from a pond, Alice and the caterpillar, birch trees, and drawings on the sidewalk, and paying more attention when small, happy moments wash over you. Now, let's settle in. Get as comfortable as you can. You are about to fall asleep, and you will sleep deeply all night long. I know I am just a stranger on the internet, but I hope you can feel how earnestly I care, how I am holding space for you to let your guard down and feel safe and dream sweetly. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Again, inhale. Out with sound. Good. Sidewalk Chalk. The sunshine and warm weather was back. The storms last week had been a nice reprieve. The grass was green. The flowers looked refreshed. And the lily pads in the pond seemed to have doubled in number in the last few days. I'd felt the urge to get out and catch some sun on my face, so I'd wandered into the park downtown. The coffee shop on Main Street had kombucha on tap, and I had a tall, icy cup of it in my hand as I strolled past the newspaper kiosk at the entrance. The paved path circling the pond was busy with walkers and strollers, and I turned at a fork to go deeper into a wooded area. I love that feeling of, even in the middle of town, being able to suddenly step into wilderness and nature. The bird song rose around me, like the volume dial had just been turned up. And a chipmunk crossed in front of me, his cheeks bulging with forage snacks. I sighed as I passed under the shade of a giant oak tree. The wind blew, and a few leftover raindrops that had been clinging to its leaves fell to my face and arms. I sipped at my tea, tart and floral. I thought it had been elderberry or huckleberry lemon. Either way, it was delicious. And I caught myself feeling truly happy, contented. I'd realized these moments flicker through my days all the time, like sunlight filtering down to the sidewalk through the leaves. And I'd been trying to pay more attention to them, to let them take up more space in my mind by simply witnessing them with my eyes wide open, my senses alert. It was as if I was marking them down, like a hatch mark chalked on a wall, an accounting of the goodness in my days. A small murky pool had formed from the rain around a stand of birch trees. And as I passed it, a sudden movement caught my eye. It was immediately followed by a plop, and I realized I'd startled a frog. I stopped to wait for him to surface. Sure enough, a few seconds later, a tiny curved head and two round blinking eyes peered up at me. I could just see his limbs floating beneath the waterline as ripples streamed away in concentric circles. I thought of a haiku I'd read from the book on my bedside table. The old pond. A frog jumps in. The sound of the water. It had been written by a poet named Matsuo Basho, who died 300 years before I'd been born and lived in a land 6,000 miles away. Yet we'd both noted the same moment. He'd described exactly how it felt to be here, right now. I smiled at the frog, finding the continuity from Basho to me a comfort and a joy. The path took me out of the copse of trees and into an orderly garden, full of lavender, delphinium, and foxglove. There were neat boxwoods and topiaries carved into cones, spirals and giant toadstools. What a difference from the wild I'd just stepped out of. I almost expected to see the Queen of Hearts marching toward me. I looked down at the path and saw that someone else must have had the same thought. There was a white rabbit, sketched with sidewalk chalk on the pavement. Beside it was a pocket watch on a gold chain and a teapot. All of the drawings were a little bit faded, and I guessed they'd been made just before the rain had fallen. I paused, wondering if I'd dropped out of the poetry of Basho and down the rabbit hole into Wonderland. I remembered a flyer I'd seen at the coffee shop while waiting for my drink order, a program run by the library. What had it said? Something like stories and sidewalk chalk. I'd been skimming it when they called my name and hadn't picked up much of what it was about. but clearly it was just like it sounded. I imagined a librarian telling about Alice and the Cheshire Cat, drawing out bottles with tags attached and playing cards. And I felt a bit disappointed that I'd missed it. Grown-ups like stories too. In the next section of pavement, the kids must have been encouraged to draw characters from the story, and I spotted what I thought might have been the Mad Hatter and the caterpillar. There was also a dinosaur, Bingo, and what I was pretty sure was Cookie Monster. So they'd added a bit of their own favorites. At the edge of the flower garden was a small wooden box on a stand, sort of like the little libraries in my own neighborhood, where you could borrow and lend books. But this one was full to bursting with colored chalk, dusty cylinders in shades of pink and green and yellow, some fresh and unused, others smaller and broken, gathered in an old coffee cup. Chalked on the pavement below the box were the simple words, "Express yourself." What a delightful invitation. I sorted through the clinking pieces and sat down on the path. I drew a bit. A tree, a bluebird, a rainbow with fluffy white clouds on either end. I drew the frog floating in the pool, and the chipmunk with his stuffed cheeks. I went back to the faded images drawn by the storyteller and did my best to color them back in, retracing so that they would last a few more days. I thought about the poem in the woods, the story in the garden, and the attempt I'd been making to witness more of the good things that happened in my orbit. I took a blue stick of chalk back to the edge of the tree line. There was another line of poetry that had been drifting through my mind, a line by the profound and beautiful Mary Oliver. I sketched it out on the path, hoping that the next person who saw it would be likewise inspired. I stood back and whispered her instructions for living a life. She wrote, "Pay attention, be amazed, tell about it." Sidewalk Chalk. The sunshine and warm weather was back. The storms last week had been a nice reprieve. The grass was green. The flowers looked refreshed. And the lily pads in the pond seemed to have doubled in number in the last few days. I'd felt the urge to get out and catch some sun on my face, so I'd wandered into the park downtown. The coffee shop on Main Street had kombucha on tap, and I had a tall, icy cup of it in my hand as I strolled past the newspaper kiosk at the entrance. The paved path circling the pond was busy with walkers and strollers, and I turned at a fork to go deeper into a wooded area. I love that feeling of, even in the middle of town, being able to suddenly step into wilderness and nature. The bird song rose around me, like the volume dial had just been turned up, and a chipmunk crossed in front of me, his cheeks bulging with foraged snacks. I sighed as I passed under the shade of a giant oak tree. The wind blew, and a few leftover raindrops that had been clinging to its leaves fell to my face and arms. I sipped at my tea, tart and floral. I thought it had been elderberry or huckleberry lemon. Either way, it was delicious, and I caught myself feeling truly happy and contented. I'd realized these moments flicker through my days all of the time, like sunlight filtering down to the sidewalk through the leaves. And I'd been trying to pay more attention to them, to let them take up more space in my mind by simply witnessing them with my eyes wide open, my senses alert. It was as if I was marking them down, like a hatch mark, chalked onto a wall, an accounting of the goodness in my days. A small, murky pool had formed from the rain around a stand of birch trees. And as I passed it, a sudden movement caught my eye. It was immediately followed by a plop, and I realized I'd startled a frog. I stopped to wait for him to surface. Sure enough, a few seconds later, a tiny curved head and two round, blinking eyes peered up at me. I could just see his limbs floating beneath the waterline as ripples streamed away in concentric circles. I thought of a haiku I'd read in the books on my bedside table. The old pond. A frog jumps in. The sound of water. It had been written by a poet named Matsuo Basho, who died 300 years before I'd been born and lived in a land 6,000 miles away. Yet, we'd both noted the same moment. He'd described exactly how it felt to be here, right now. I smiled at the frog, finding the continuity from Basho to me a comfort and a joy. The path took me out of the copse of trees and into an orderly garden full of lavender, delphinium, and foxglove. There were neat boxwoods and topiaries carved into cones, spirals, and giant toadstools. What a difference from the wild I'd just stepped out of. I almost expected to see the Queen of Hearts marching toward me. I looked down at the path and saw that someone must have had the same thought. There was a white rabbit sketched with sidewalk chalk on the pavement. Beside it was a pocket watch on a gold chain and a teapot. All of the drawings were a bit faded, and I guessed they'd been made just before the rain had fallen. I paused, wondering if I'd dropped out of the poetry of Basho and down the rabbit hole into Wonderland. I remembered a flyer I'd seen at the coffee shop while waiting for my drink order. A program run by the library. What had it said? Something like stories and sidewalk chalk. I'd been skimming it when they called my name and hadn't picked up much of what it was about. But clearly, it was just like it sounded. I imagined a librarian telling about Alice and the Cheshire Cat, drawing out bottles with tags attached and playing cards, and felt a bit disappointed that I'd missed it. Grown-ups like stories too. In the next section of pavement, the kids must have been encouraged to draw characters from the story. And I spotted what I thought might have been the Mad Hatter and the caterpillar. There was also a dinosaur, Bingo, and what I was pretty sure was Cookie Monster. So they'd added a bit of their own favorites. At the edge of the flower garden was a small wooden box on a stand, sort of like the little libraries in my own neighborhood, where you could borrow and lend books. But this one was full to bursting with colored chalk, dusty cylinders and shades of pink and green and yellow, some fresh and unused, others smaller and broken, gathered in an old coffee cup. Chalked on the pavement below the box were the simple words, "Express yourself." What a delightful invitation. I sorted through the clinking pieces and sat down on the path. I drew a bit, a tree, a bluebird, a rainbow with fluffy white clouds on either end. I drew the frog floating in the pool, and the chipmunk with his stuffed cheeks. I went back to the faded images drawn by the storyteller and did my best to color them back in, retracing so that they would last for a few more days. I thought about the poem in the woods, the story in the garden, and the attempt I'd been making to witness more of the good things that happened in my orbit. I took a blue stick of chalk back to the edge of the tree line. There was another line of poetry that had been drifting through my mind, a line by the profound and beautiful Mary Oliver. I sketched it out on the path, hoping the next person who saw it would be likewise inspired. I stood back and whispered her instructions for living a life. She wrote, "Pay attention. Be amazed. Tell about it. Sweet dreams."
from PRX.
Friends beyond the binary, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is a live, a recorded Sleep With Me live show, a summer-themed one, Sans Day at the Beach. So the sound is going to be a little bit different than a normal episode. It'll be a little bit different structurally and a little bit looser. But I really wanted to, this used to be something that was only available to members. But we've been trying to figure out, to give you a taste of what we've been doing for years. And hopefully we get to do it all together long into the future. Because of the people really that do support the show directly, that say, hey, this is valuable to me. Let me give value back. And this is one of the things we've been able to do, and then record it and put it out. And actually, we couldn't even afford to pay for the membership of Sleep With Me Plus allowed us, or our membership allowed us to be able to test out live shows. Because live shows financially don't work for Sleep With Me, but they're really cool. And this was a time when we were able to do a bunch in a row, so we really caught I don't know. So I thought I just wanted to give you a little special insight, put you to sleep at the same time. So this is a reinterpretation, I think, of another Sleep With Me episode, Sans Day at the Beach, live. Hey, everybody, this is Scoots. Are you the one person that I'm trying to get a hold of tonight to sign up at Sleep With Me Plus, sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus? Here's the ways to find out. Does Sleep With Me make your life better? Okay, great. Do you listen on a regular basis? Okay. Have you decided not, if you've decided not to support the show, then you could just opt out right now. You say, makes my life better. I listen on a regular basis, but I already decided I'm not going to support the show. Don't worry. I'm not trying to change your mind if you've decided not to support the show. But okay, so you're still with me? Great. You might be the one. Here's some other ways to figure out if you're the one. Okay, have you been listening longer than 6 months? Okay, does Sleep With Me bring you comfort in the deep dark night or help you fall asleep? Okay. Do you listen to Sleep With Me 2 nights a week or more? Okay. All right, so you might be the one then. Okay, what about, do you fall asleep within 45 to 60 minutes of the episode? Or you listen to about that much every night? Okay. Have you listened longer than a year? Oh, okay, you might be the one then. Do you listen 2 nights a week? Okay. 3 nights a week? Okay. Well, boy, you might be the one. You might be the one I'm trying to get a hold of, to see if you're still listening and hearing me, to see if you're willing to support the show. Okay, but let's keep going. Do you fall asleep in less than 45 minutes? Do you use a sleep timer? Okay, do you listen 3, 4, 5 nights a week? Okay, you might be the one. Have you been listening longer than 2 years? Oh, okay. Do you listen to more than one episode a night? Okay, there's a pretty good chance you're the one then. I mean, you get to choose in the end. Have you been listening longer than 3 years? Oh, wow. I'm pretty sure you're one of the people I'm trying to reach to see if you want to decide if you're the one. Do you listen 6, 7 nights a week? You've been listening longer than 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? Do you fall asleep very fast, before the intro's even over, just during the wind down? Okay. You may be the one I'm trying to reach. And if you are the one, really could use your support. Ideally, by supporting the show on Sleep With Me Plus. It's designed for super listeners like you. And you can do that at sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus because that'll keep the show going. And here's the thing. I only need you, right? There's 19 other people listening who said yes to a lot of that stuff. But in the end, they said, well, maybe one day, maybe tomorrow. Or no, some of those are yeses, but it's a no, Scoots. And that's okay because I just need the one. So I don't know. Are you the one or not? Now, if you're the one and you say, Scoots, I just can't afford $60 a year. I just can't afford $7 a month. Well, I've been in that spot. Even when I was making the podcast, I've been in that spot. My daughter and I were just talking about the times we didn't have a car and how much walking and how much we took the bus. That's why I was making the show. And, so I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, but you could still make a difference in the future of the podcast by being a part of the referral program. So if you feel like I'm the one, I want to be the one, you could support the show at sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus, or you could be an active member of our referral program, and we talk about it all the time. Those are the ways you could be the one. We could use your help in one of those two places. So thank you so much if you're the one. If you're not, that's fine too. Thanks and good night. Oh, Mystery Bard. A lot of people help out on the show. Who are they?
Posty poster son sounds like an earful. Wrote the theme song. Edits episodes. Carl W. the legend. Also edits episodes. Ashley, Kenny, Scotty, Jennifer. Runner. Eric and the team at Astound are on the website. I am the Mystery Bard. I do the lullabies, yeah. I do commissions at jonathanmann.net. I'll write a song for you. Any reason at all. You can tell me the story and I'll make it personal. You see the kindness shine straight on through when the listeners form their own Facebook group. Keith, Stacy, Sarah, Julie, and Jennifer. These are your moderators. Get support dear Scooter on Patreon. Buy the merch and support the sponsors. You can find anything you want at sleepwithmepodcast.com. And we're so proud that we could dance. Rusty Biscuit, Lois, Anna like banana. Leah does the transcripts.
Thanks, Mystery Bard. Oh, and hey, if you're listening to this, you know, the referral program, if you're not in a position to financially support the show, is a huge way to support the show and get free access to Sleep With Me Plus. That's at sleepwithmepodcast.com/refer. But there's also a tiny way anybody can help out the show. It's free. It helps out the show a little bit. And that's following the podcast wherever you listen to it, or commenting if you listen on Spotify or YouTube. It really helps other people discover the show, helps you stay up to date on the latest episodes. And only 50% of people follow or subscribe. It's free to follow or subscribe in podcast apps. So if you do that, it just gives it helps people discover the show, and it helps you stay up to date on the show. So follow or subscribe in your podcast app. That'll help out the show a little bit. Not necessarily keep us going forever, but I'd appreciate it. And while you're at it, go ahead and follow Bedtime Stories from Sleep With Me. That's in every podcast app, too. That has a story-only episodes that'll add it to your sleepy repertoire. Thanks, and what do you say we get on with the show? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and friends beyond the binary, it's time for the podcaster who's going to be... I have terrible news for bubble blowing, actually, but we'll get to that later, I guess. It's been a rough night for bubble blowers everywhere, but it's time for the podcast. I'll be serving up the lulls like an amuse-bouche made of nothing, I think, because that's what they're made of. It's time for Sleep With Me, the podcast and live show that puts you to sleep. And normally on the podcast, I have the services of a mystery bard. Last time I had 2 younger people help me out with this. So this time we'll see how it goes. Those of you that have never been to a show, please bear with me. Mystery bard, a lot of people help out on this show. Who are they? Now I have to sing for the mystery bard because he's not here. I am, Chris Posty Posterson from Sounds Like an Earful wrote the theme song. Edits episodes, yeah. Carl W.'s a legend. Also edits episodes. Kenny, Scotty, and Jennifer on our artwork. Eric and the team at Astound are on the website. I am the mystery bard. I do the lullabies, yeah. He says different things at different times. You can commission a song. I'll write a song for you. Any reason at all. You could tell me the story. I'll make it personal. You see the kindness shined straight on through. The listeners form their own Facebook group. Keith, Julie, Jennifer, Stacy and Sarah, those are your moderators. You can support Dear Scooter on Patreon, buy the merch and support the sponsors. You buy anything you want. It's sleepwithmepodcast.com. And we're so proud we could dance to be a part of Night Vale Presents. And now on with the show. Thanks, Mr. Bard. That's great. It is melodious as always. I'm at Dear Scooter on Twitter and Instagram. That's where you can find me. And let's get on with the show. Hey, are you up all night tossing turning, mind racing, trouble getting to sleep, trouble staying asleep? Well, welcome. This is Sleep With Me, the podcast and live show that puts you to sleep. We do it with a bedtime story. All you need to do is get in your bed or your poof or your chair. I guess there's no beds here, but get in your chair or your Big Joe or your yellow floaty thing, your couch. Just get comfortable. We lowered the lights and I kind of pressed play. We do with a bedtime story. All you need to, that's the part. I'm going to send my voice across the deep, dark night. I'm going to use lulling, soothing, creaky dulcet tones, pointless meanders, superfluous tangents, to kind of create a safe place where you can set aside whatever's keeping you awake, or in this case, kind of the day. The Wednesday gets a bad rap because it's like everybody makes memes about it and stuff. But so we'll leave Wednesday behind, or we'll rest in the arms of Wednesday evening. What else? To send my voice across deep, dark, lulling, soothing, creaky dulcet tones, pointless meanders. Basically, if you're new, now I know there's a decent amount of people that have never been to a show tonight, so welcome. And maybe you might be wondering what you're doing here and what to expect. It's basically like the podcast. You could just get comfortable and listen. Tonight, we're going to be telling a story. It's a new version of an old story that you all had played a part in. And normally, like during this part of the live show and the podcast, I try to come up with like a metaphor for like what the podcast is, how it works, and all that stuff. And I had a list of metaphors that I was going to use tonight. I was thinking about using sand toys because tonight's a sand-themed episode. And then I tallied these results, and it was. I'm going to send these off to Stockholm later. And they're gonna but bubble blowing it didn't do well, which is surprising. So normally I try to come up with a metaphor and I say, okay, what would be a good way to describe the podcast? Because it's kind of being gentle. So I thought I'd try to call in bubble blowing because I did a rehearsal today and I said, well, somebody's going to choose bubble blowing. I said, don't worry. Like we're going to run through the live show. We're going to go through the list. We're going to go through the intro. We'll test out that. Cause the bag that you hold sand toys in, that was another metaphor for the show tonight. And I said, don't worry, bubble blowing. You're going to do great. And bubble blowing said, I don't even know if I could go to the show because it's just, I don't know, like you never talked about me on the podcast before. So I said, okay, well, you could just stay home with Koa, my dog, and get comfortable. And I'll just tell you how it goes. Like I said, the listeners are going to love you. You know, we're going to have, it's not a vote. It's not like a popularity contest. Like people will just write down what they want. There's a little story menu. And, I guess I didn't know I was going to keep track of how many people voted for what. But, when I get home tonight, I'll say, hey, bubble blowing. I'll say, how'd the live show go? And I'll say, pretty good. Like it was fun. It was nice. We did it. So did you talk about me and all? Oh yeah, I did during the show. Well, during the intro, like, why don't you sit down? Some people just don't understand. What I think it was is like that it was confusing the way I wrote it. Like bubble blowing is not the same as enjoying blown bubbles or running around with bubbles as they, and having fun with them. So that's probably why no one voted for you. I could double check. Nope. But, like, why don't you, what I'll do is I'll tell you a bedtime story tonight because I'm sure it just doesn't mean anything. They might have been thinking about blowing bubble with gum is what I think a lot of people thought, right, everybody? And it was like, well, then if you blow a bubble with gum, you get it on your face. You weren't thinking about those soap bubbles and how nice that thing. And also, I think, no offense to kids, but, kids' parties have kind of ruined bubble blowing because you go and they give away usually like a tiny thing of bubbles. And I think we were experiencing a time, like that was like one of the great, not the bubble. We need a bubble glut is what we need to learn to appreciate bubbles more. But, tonight I'll tell bubble blowing the story of the happiest bubble on earth. And the moral of the story for the bubble will be, it's you, the bubble snuggled up with a human being. And so that's kind of what the podcast is normally supposed to do without all that bad news stuff. I guess I have to work on my skills of I said, well, I didn't expect no one to get no votes because it's not a popularity contest, but I don't know what the opposite of popularity is. But don't worry about it. Like what I could do, I'll just blow some bubbles with you. So the whole idea of the podcast is to take your mind off of stuff. And I don't think if bubble blowing was here, I'd be talking about something else. I'd be saying, I'd be talking about Sinbad, the bag you carry sand toys in, and why would what if you brought that in the living room? So to take bubble blowing's mind off of stuff. But I make the podcast because when I try to go to sleep a lot of times, I get like bubble blowing where I worry if it's a popularity contest or I overthink. I'll overthink. I said, Drew, what were you doing, man? How could you not test? Why didn't you test that out? Like you should have thought about bubble. Like what kind of person doesn't think about bubble blowing's feelings? All the glory votes like sand castles and rock collecting and beachcombing and holes and swimming and water balloon tossing. Well, and it wasn't even at the bottom. So I don't know. We'll see what the experts at Stockholm say about this when they run all their tests, and they also analyze your handwriting to see if that corresponds at all. But the main thing is, I'm glad you're here. And if you've ever had trouble sleeping or you're having trouble leaving your day behind or you're stuck in a bubble related metaphor, I want you to know that that's why I make the show, to keep you company and to let you know you're not alone. Now, this particular style of episode we're going to do tonight originated. I did it once before, and this one will be a little bit different. A lot of times I like to do like a guided meditation. And I thought I had this one episode where I did guided meditation as like what it would be like to be a snowflake, right? And then I was like, I'll do one for sand. But as I thought about sand and as I started to work on this episode about sand, I realized that one of the biggest experiences of sand, and as I interviewed thousands and thousands of grains of sand, is that they're really a viewer of experience. So with that in mind, I want you to just focus on, your connection to the floor or your chair or wherever you are, and just sink a little bit in deeper. And you're going to start to notice that all around you are other grains of sand, at a comfortable distance in this case. And you're nestled in there. You're one among many. But you got a nice seat. This particular grain of sand we've been working with has a really good view. No optometrist talks about the eyesight of grains of sand, but they don't have a 360-degree view. But whatever part isn't covered up by other sand, especially this grain of sand that you are right now, as you get more comfortable, you got, almost like a dome view, almost like a IMAX planetarium view of the world. And you're just coming to consciousness right now, and you're noticing that you're feeling the day around you. You're hearing the wind. It's gentle. It's more of a breeze, and the water is lapping against something, and you start to think, okay, I'm a grain of sand. I'm on a beach. The world comes into a little bit more focus, and again, the water, it's the waves are so gentle, they're just swishing as they touch the shore, and then they're making like a shh sound as they flow back out. And you're just kind of feeling that rhythm, maybe you don't believe that sand breathes, but I do. So your breathing is falling in line with that swishing. And it's not warm or cool right now. You really couldn't peg the time of day because you're just lying there. It's light out, but there's no direct sun on you. But then you hear someone just a distance up on a bluff yelling, saying, well, let's see how I can put it in. So take the frigging kids to the beach. It's 11 o'clock already. So then you know it's 11 o'clock, and for some reason that makes sense to you. You also are looking, and you could see that this water is a western-facing water, so the horizon is clear. It has a couple of wispy clouds out there. The water is very, very calm, but not mirror-like. It has a tiny ripple to it. And you look to the east, and there's a bluff, a beach that turns into a bluff, and then there's houses up on the bluff and trees reaching up into the sky. And the sun is just slowly starting to peek through the mid-level of the trees. And then you start to hear a boat engine in the distance getting closer. It's not a whine, because a whine is kind of but it's a positive version of a whine, a hum and a drone, I guess, together, and it's getting louder and louder. And you can hear the ripples on the water reflected in the sound of the hull of the boat pitter-pattering against the water. And then you start to hear some activity, and you turn back to the bluff. There's a set of stone stairs leading down to you, and there's a line of children, and they're walking very deliberately. They're, it's tough to tell how old kids are, especially in a sleep podcast, but there's like little kids, and then there's a couple tiny kids, and then there's a couple of taller kids, like you might call tweens. And they're all able to walk on their own, and a couple of them are holding on to the rail as they come down these stairs. But again, you've been, you're a grain of sand. You just retained consciousness today for today, but in the past, maybe you're a collective too. You see, kids don't normally walk this kind of neatly. And then you see behind them an adult male who kind of, at first glance, you just think buffoon when you see him. He has on a beach towel, but it's turned, instead of the cartoony side of the beach towel, he has the white underside wrapped around him above his waist like an apron or something. And then he has two towels slung over his arm like he's a waiter, and he's following the children down the stairs. And then on his other hand, he has a tray with some sort of bottle on it or something, and he's kind of doing a terrible imitation of like a French person muttering, something like that. And the kids are all, again, walking down, and they get down to the beach, and the uncle comes up behind them. He says, okay, children, okay, welcome to this restaurant. So good to see you. Thank you for coming. I see you're all in swimsuits and swim shirts and swim shoes, and you got to the dress code for our restaurant tonight. But you seem to be remiss. Now, I'm merely your maître d', but I need to make sure you're ready for the evening of experience you're going to have, even though it's a daytime, pre-afternoon. That's the prime time for our restaurant. You're all missing one main part of our dress code, which is sunscreen, which I have here. Not just any sunscreen, but the finest sunscreen. Sunscreen so rare you cannot purchase it legally here in America. It's the sought after the illegally imported European NOAD. It's only for use in Europe because it's proven to be 100% safe and effective. But we have it here for your sunscreen. So come on, children, I want you to get in line. And I know you're familiar with the very famous train car sunscreen back application. So the children line up and they get in one behind each other and they start rubbing the sunscreen as the uncle squeezes it and splats it into their palms, and they start doing one another's shoulders and backs. And he says, make sure you get the backs of the arms and the back of the armpit. Those are two easy places to miss. And then they starts to tell the children to pretend they're kneading their arms, and they apply the sunscreen to their arms and to their neck and to their ears. It's a whole thing. It takes a while, and he's constantly using different methods. But of course, the tops of the feet, the backs of the ankles, sides of the ankles, the calves, they all get the attention they need. And then the kids, they start, he keeps trying to gamify it. But then the kids, they actually start looking at one another. And the one downside of European NOAD is that it's, high in titanium oxide and zinc oxide. So it's mostly like a white clown makeup, but it really works. And so the kids have a laugh, and the uncle says, "Don't worry, it slowly gets absorbed until you get wet." So the kids sing, and then the uncle says, "Well, so glad to have you here at the restaurant. I'm glad that now you're all dressed properly. Have a seat. Do not go near the water, or you will not be able to eat lunch. I'm going to go get your hostess for the evening, and we'll continue on." So the uncle goes up the stairs, and he's gone for a few minutes, and the kids start looking at one another, and they start tossing some stones into the water and going up to the edge of the water and saying, just tempting fate, wanting to dip their toes in. But again, the sun isn't quite there yet. And then someone comes back down the stairs in a bathrobe, with a broom on their head, or no, not, what are those called? Mops, a mop head. And it's really the uncle, but he looks like he's wearing a mop head as a wig and a robe. And he comes down the stairs with a bit of a sachet. And he says, "Oh, hello, welcome to my restaurant, children. I'm Sandy Shoals. Welcome to Sandy Shoals. It used to be Sandy Shores, but there's a kids game, a video game that took that title. But welcome to Sandy Shoals Restaurant. I'm so glad that all of you are here. You look lovely in all of your sunscreen. And we have we did have a 7-course menu tonight, but we cut it down to 6 courses. And I'm really, really excited to serve all of you. Really fun." And then the kids, they're not having it. They say, "When can we go swimming? Can we go swimming? Can we go swimming? Can we go swimming?" Oh, children, it's much too cold to go swimming. That's much later on the menu. So we're going to start off with some very exciting work. So everyone have a seat. I just want to look at you and enjoy your presence and buy some time. And the kids, they start to sit on. And a lot of beaches, especially ones with stone staircases, have this, if you want to talk about something that's not treated with respect, I'd say it's like beach furniture. I guess neglect would be the right word. So there's neglected beach furniture there, and it's multi-generational. I mean, I'd love to see like an anthropologist report about beach furniture, because there's one chair that has the very old-fashioned seatbelt design, the crisscrossed seatbelts. It's like a little bit thinner than a seatbelt material. And then there's a lounge chair with what is like those tubes. They're flat tubes, and those are pretty comfortable, but they also make you sweat profusely. But a couple of kids are sitting on that one. That one's like a electric blue and a hot magenta color. And then there's a couple of newer ones that are made from that same seatbelt-like cloth, but the whole chair is like that. And then there's a couple like combination chair coolers that are like low to the ground that even the kids won't sit in. I don't know who came up with those. But the kids are there, and then Sandy does a little walk, and she says, tonight the first serving is going to be the digging of holes. So I want all of you children to just close your eyes. Now picture the beach in your mind. And this beach is about 15 feet from the water to where the grass and stuff starts to grow. And there's some rocks and stuff. And says, pick what spot you're going to go to and begin to dig, because we're going to start off with digging. We're going to work up an appetite for the water, but it's also the perfect time because there's no sun. You know, the sand is going to be the perfect temperature for hole digging. And the kids all set the place in their mind, and Sandy says, okay, go ahead, go off to your holes. And the kids start to dig. And it, again, just like taking a poll for a story menu, it's amazing the diversity of choices. So one child goes right down to the edge of the water and sits down so their butt's right in the water. And then another child goes right to the top of the beach, and the kids are spread out. And Sandy's, oh, look at those I love where you chose to dig. Now, before I see some of you are digging, but before you start digging, before you partake of the earth and the sand, I want you all to hold your hands out. And I want you to look at your fingernails and study your fingernails and take a picture with your mind of what your fingernails look like, because that's what your mother's going to expect your fingernails look like tonight or when you go for lunch. And we will return those fingernails to that state. So remember it. And the kids just stare at Aunt Sandy. And she says, no, we have plenty of bars of soap down here, and you can do it's not like it's in someone's bathroom, so you can dig your nails into the soap. Don't worry right now, children. And now begin to dig. And the kids, they start to dig in the sand. And the first dig of sand is always like, that's your glory sand right there. That's your beach sand. It's smooth to the touch. It parts. It doesn't really hold any pattern or shape, but not that far underneath it. 1-2 knuckles deep is that firm touch of the first wet sand. And now lower down, the one kid that's already in the water is just kind of digging in what kind of is like a mud bog already, or a sand bog, but then the kids, you start to even hear the scrape of the nails against the first parts of the wet sand. And Aunt Sandy, I guess because it's her namesake, I didn't even realize. Oh, what dig? Oh, those sounds of digging. Oh, look at the scooping. And then everyone's digging a little bit differently. Like one kid is like doing a downward dog dig. I guess if you were looking for some cheap alliteration, digging with two hands while standing on 2 feet. Another kid has their hand, their head on their elbow, and is just digging gently with just the fingertips. One youngster is like doing what do you call it? Like a scoop, with one arm scoop, and the hole is slowly getting deeper and deeper, just the width of her arm. And saying, oh, look at this. Now, when you reach water, let me know, because that's one of the most exciting parts of digging holes in the sand. And the kid, of course, in the water says, I reached water. And Aunt Sandy just walks down and pats him on his head. And she says, very good, very good. You keep up that digging. And then the next kid, not that far up from the beach, says, "Oh, I got to water," and he was digging like I don't know, a bit like you'd say, like I don't know, I've never seen a marsupial dig a hole, but like a kind of a nice method, like a double finger. And he's got a nice, like a wide hole with the water seeping up from the bottom. Further up, the one-armed hole digger, Aunt Sandy gets closer. She goes, "Oh, I love how your motion is not down, but it's a C shape." And she says, "Aunt Sandy, I've got sand. I've reached sand, or water." And she says, "Oh yes, water, dear, water." She says, "Children, I want you to think about the layers of sand and the different feel of the sand. Each, and then the other kids, they start to yell till the last kid, all the way up at the top of the beach line, says, I haven't reached, and Aunt Sandy, I've just got wet rocks." And Aunt Sandy says, "Good, very good. Because now, children, we're going to transition from digging in the sand to using the sand that we've dug out. We're going to start to build some sand castles. But first we have to build consensus. Many people just build sandcastles haphazardly, or do it by kind of social Darwinism, but we're going to do some consensus building before we do some sandcastle building. So who has some opinions about?" The kids just kind of, their jaws are slack. If Sandy says, "Well, what kind of sandcastles would you like to build, children?" And one of the kids says, like a one that's like a real castle. And Aunt Sandy says, okay. And then she says, "What are some other ways, or some other ways you want to build a sandcastle or have?" And a couple of the kids, one kid says, like the aerial sandcastle. And Aunt Sandy says, "Tell me more." And she says, "Well, when you hold the sand, it's wet and it kind of drips out of your hand and it's like wax almost." And Aunt Sandy goes, "Oh, yes, I could see how you could say that's like the Little Mermaid style." And a couple of other kids say, like, "What if you just, push sand and then, decorate it?" And Aunt Sandy goes, "Oh, like a beachcombing method." And they say, yeah. And she says, "Okay, do we have any tools?" And the child that wanted the medieval style sandcastle says, "Oh, I have molds." And Nancy says, "Okay, go and fetch your molds. And what we'll do is we'll make all of these into one castle, starting with this wonderful hole that Ryan down here dug, and we'll build it right here close to the shore, because there's lots of wet sand for the sand drizzling, and then further up is the more semi-wet solid sand for the Hollywood-style sand castles." And she goes, "Okay, who's going to work on the Little Mermaid style one?" And the two kids that were kind of already interested in it say that. "And who's going to help with the sand forms? Who's going to help your cousin Daniel with that?" And they say, "Oh, okay, I'll help with that." And so they start packing in the molds. And there's still one half of the kids left. She says, "Okay, who is saying, what would you decorate a castle with?" And Miranda says, feathers. That's what I'd decorate the castle with. And Aunt Sandy says, "Well, what else would we decorate a castle with, a sand castle?" And Lila, she says, "Decorate it with sticks and stones." And she says, "Okay, the two of you start combing the beach for things for the castle." And so she says, "Now, before you go, there's limitations to how far you can go. Now, you could go all the way down to where that pine tree is, but not past there. And you could go all the way back down to those big rocks, but not the really big rocks. So that's the area you're allowed to beachcomb." And then Aunt Sandy says, "Before you go, I got to tell you about, because, I'm a great lover of, your Aunt Sandy has combed so many beaches. It's one of my favorite pastimes. So, Miranda, what do you think? Are you going to be on the shore side or the high side looking for things?" And she says, the high side, the high tide. And she says, oh, very good. And she says, what else are you going to be looking for, children? And then they say, well, tell us more, Aunt Sandy. It sounds like you really wanted to talk about your beachcombing experience. She said, oh, yeah, when I was a child, I would go up and down the beach. I loved to collect the fireworks after the 4th of July, the day after. Your Aunt Sandy would walk all the way. She would walk miles on the beach collecting old fireworks because she just thought the pictures on them were so... And then Miranda and Lila, they were already gone. So Aunt Sandy sighed and said none of the kids wanted to hear about how I loved to walk the beach collecting and all of the cool names the fireworks this year were just way too much to say, oh, come on. But they always had cool names. But this was, this is nostalgic fireworks, which are much different than real ones. And then they went off and they set off, and the children were working on the forms. It was Ryan was digging a canal, actually. It said, oh, this is going to supply water to the center of the castle. And then it was the boy's name was Joey D. He was the one packing the sand and helping build the medieval style castle. And Sophia, she was doing the drizzling of the sand on the Little Mermaid side of things. And it was all going well. Very well, but even the kids that were working on, I mean, I've never successfully made a sandcastle style sandcastle, but they had built a couple of walls with whatever the fancy things that you shoot arrows out of and stuff. But the sun now had peeked over the trees and was casting its rays down on the sand, and just like the phases of the moon and other things I don't understand, the tide had started to come in too. And so the canal was starting to fill up, and the center of the castle was starting to become one of those mud bogs. Now the other kids had returned, and they were putting in feathers, sticking them in like they were flags, but then the castle starts to crack, which again is, I don't understand how sand works, but it's like, oh, the outside of the castle is wet, but then the inside is dry, so then the walls crack, and the children's attention started to crack too. And so Sandy said, okay, our next serving today. Oh, wow, what a day we're having here. We've got great beach combing. We've got great hole digging. And just trying to think, like, your Aunt Sandy was thinking it would be a great day for bubble blowing. And the kids go, what about swimming? What about swimming? What about swimming? And they were all covered in sand. And so she said, okay, I guess it's time to go swimming. She said, so, okay, everybody go in. And once again, she set the expectations, don't go past here or here. Everybody buddy up. Everybody had a buddy, and it was the water as they started to wade in. It was crystal clear. You could see to the bottom. Now, this particular body of water, Lake Terry, as it's known affectionately, has rocks up until you're knee deep. So the kids were kind of struggling to get across the rocks, and Aunt Sandy said, what I like to do is crawl across the rocks. Like I'm doing the reverse. She goes, once the earth was covered with a primordial swamp or something like that. It was all ocean, and then at some point became land, and some kind of fish creature climbed out of the primordial ooze onto the land. And now I want you to think about being one of those and just saying, you know what, the water's way better. Let's just go back. I've had enough of this land. And the kids climbed like they were whatever those tadpole creatures are that are famous for coming out of the primordial ooze. And they climbed until they got to the sand. And as soon as they got there, they started splashing and getting wet. And Aunt Sandy, it takes a while. For an adult, getting wet is not it's something you got to ease your way into. And so she said, don't splash me, please. Please leave me alone. Stay away from me. And eventually she held her breath and she dived under the water. And she used this famous method that is known around the world for getting adjusted to water temperatures, which you could try out for a free pro-am tip. It's called the mango method. And what you do is you jump into the water, or in this case, you dunk yourself, and then you jump back out, and then you dunk yourself again, and then you jump back out, then you dunk yourself again, and then you jump back out until 30 times. You just up and down, or if you're at a pool, you jump in the pool, you climb back out, you jump in, and at some point you reach a stasis where you could be in any temperature, reasonable temperature water. Meanwhile, by the time Aunt Sandy was done with this, the kids were having issues with. They said, Aunt Sandy, we need to play a game. And they said, can we play Marco Polo? And Aunt Sandy said, no, there's no fair way to play Marco Polo. And I don't like the term Marco Polo. I don't know. But we've got a wide range of kids. Wouldn't be fair. And they said, could we play freeze tag or minnows in the freeze? And she said, no, I don't even know, because then you'll make up the rules and then you'll tell them to me. And they say, well, what game can we play? And first Aunt Sandy said, have fun in the water. And the kids say, boring. And so Aunt Sandy said, there's a famous game I used to play called Frankenstein in the water. And the kids say, who's Frankenstein? And Aunt Sandy kind of shed a tear, and they said it's something about Monster High, and Aunt Sandy said, what's that? And the kids explained, and Aunt Sandy said, okay, look, Frankenstein, you probably still, there's got to be some sort of collective memory of Frankenstein. And then Joey D, he said, Aunt Sandy, it's Frankenstein's Monste, and Nancy so gets the sleep podcast, even though it's. She said, "Okay, I get it, but it's Frankenstein shorthand." And the kid said, "Well, what is the game?" And Aunt Sandy said, "Good question. It's you have to be in water between your knees and your thighs. It can't ever go below your knees, and you have to walk with your legs straight and your arms straight." And you have to walk as fast as you can like that. And the kid said, and then what? And then Aunt Sandy said, and then you have fun. And they said, well, what? And then she said, well, well, I'll chase after all of you and see if I could catch you. And they said, well, that'd be easy for you. And Aunt Sandy said, well, I mean, don't worry. So then the kids started walking around like they're Frankenstein. And then Aunt Sandy said, make the noise like you're groaning. And so the kids were walking and groaning. And Aunt Sandy was pretending to be inept, maybe not, chasing after the children. Lost her mop wig and put it back on because I forgot she had a mop wig. And, that game kept the kids entertained for a few minutes. And then they said, can we play another game? And Aunt Sandy said, well, let's play dolphins in the water. And they said, what's that? And she said, just swim around like you're dolphins. And she said, I'm not really good at thinking of water games, but I do have a very, very fun contest. And she said, Dan, go into, she goes, there's 2 buckets down at the base of the stairs. I want you to go get 2 of those buckets. They're full of water balloons. And Dan, he ran to the base of the stairs and he got the buckets. They're full of water balloons, and he brought them out, And the nice thing is in the water, like water balloons float in the water, maybe. I mean, I've never tested it out, but I'm just presuming. In this, they did. Oh, they floated. So like dreams float on the water, and the bucket floated to the side of Aunt Sandy, and the children watched, with expectation that this would be super entertaining. And they said, what are we going to play? Water balloon toss? And Aunt Sandy said, kind of. We're going to play family water balloon toss, family and friends water balloon toss. And they said, how do you play that? And Aunt Sandy said, we'll all get in a circle and we put our arms around one another. And then I pick someone and they go to the center. And she said, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. She goes, Ted, why don't you go in there? So she sent this. This was in the future. There's a young post-toddler age child named Ted, and he went in there, and she said, now throw the water balloon up as high as you can, just straight up in the air. And Ted threw it up at first, and he was just, a littler kid, so it just went up and then hit the water again. Now, it didn't break, because Aunt Sandy's a professional water balloon inflator, and she just knew what she was doing. So then she said, go and throw it again, but throw it a little bit harder. And it went up in the air, and then it hit Aunt Sandy in the head, and all the kids laughed. And they said, who's next? Who's next? So each kid took a chance, and they would stand in the middle, and they would throw the water balloon up. And since everyone had their arms around one another, you just have to wait and see, and it would just break over someone's head. But they were in the water, and it was warm, and the waves were starting to pick up to that more gentle motion. That motion that, if you really spend a lot of time in the water, like in a lake or an ocean, and you spend a few hours in there, that even after you get out of the water, the waves had that motion. The only other thing I can equate it to is like being on a chairlift, where it stays with you hours after. But they were in that, throwing water balloons up, and water was crashing on one another's heads, and they were it was fun. And then Aunt Sandy said, okay, let's play like regular water balloon toss for a while. And she set the kids into pairs, and she said, okay, well, here's how, she goes, you just toss it, and then you take a step back, and you toss it, and you take a step back. And the nice thing about doing that on water is that the balloon's less likely to break. So, the kids enjoyed that, but kids today, that's not flashy enough for them. So then Aunt Sandy said, I don't really know a lot about. She goes, well, there was duels in Harry Potter, right? And the kids said they answered the correct answer, but she said, oh, of course there were. Like in the Harry Potter, you guys didn't read. There was the famous water balloon, Aguamente. Where do you think they came up with the Aguamente spell? And so she said, okay, I want everybody to take a balloon, and you're going to go back to back. You're going to walk 10 paces. You're going to turn, and you're going to throw the water balloons at each other. But this wasn't Aunt Sandy's first trip to the beach. So then she, right as the kids were getting ready to go, she said, what would be a terrible idea? Is it like if instead of throwing the water balloons at one another, like as soon as Aunt Sandy was waiting for you to do that, you all threw the water balloons at her? Don't do that, children. That would be terrible. And she said, oh, wait, I think I'll be right back. I have to think about something. So she turned and walked a few feet away, and the children looked at one another like they were in on some big conspiracy. And they said, oh, like they nodded. And then Aunt Sandy returned, said, okay, I'm glad. I just wanted to check. I thought I saw like a clam or something that I knew. And she said, okay, well, I want everybody to get ready for their Aguamente duel for the love of Hermione Granger. And she said, everybody back to back. And she said, on 5, I'm going to close my eyes as I count down 2, she said. And she said, on 4, on 3. and Aunt Sandy's eyes were closed, and then the children looked at one another, and then on 2, she got hit with 1 water balloon, then like they just all started coming, and all the kids laughed, and like Aunt Sandy will say, "Oh, sometimes you got to humor them." And some of the kids knew that Aunt Sandy was playing along, and she said, "Okay, it's time to go in for the water. It's almost time for our second application of sunscreen. We use the European no-ad method here." She said, "Okay, everybody come in." But really, Aunt Sandy had detected a change in the water and a change in the sun. The children hadn't seen it yet, but somewhere not that far off, the humidity had sucked up so much water that a storm was brewing. And, sometimes you could just feel it in the air. And so Aunt Sandy, instead of being abrupt, said, "Okay, it's time to we're going to do some serious rock collecting now." And also, your Aunt Sandy's never skipped a rock before. So does anybody know anything about skipping rocks? And of course, all these kids knew everything. They knew everything. Oh, yeah. So she said, "Okay, well, if I want you to collect a lot of these good skipping rocks." And a couple of kids, they didn't want to say it, but they had that look. They were younger, or maybe they were like people, like me. They just never got the method of skipping rocks quite down. And so Aunt Sandy said, well, if you're not going to collect skipping rocks, I have a very important assignment for the rest of you. And a couple of kids said, "Oh, okay, what is it, Aunt Sandy?" And she said, this beach, it has this line of rocks. And everybody says, "Oh, yeah, it's all these rocks are gray. They're just these gray rocks." And they're wrong. Don't tell your parents this, but they're wrong. And Aunt Sandy said, "I've made it my mission in life. There's not just gray rocks down here. There's rocks that are the shade of red. Some you could call maroon, some you might call purple, but there's red rocks down here. It's a subtle red. And one day, your Aunt Sandy wants to collect all the rocks on this beach that are red color and just put them in one place, just to mess with everybody else, just to see if it's possible." And the kids kind of patted Aunt Sandy, so they knew that Aunt Sandy was a bit different because, she's wearing a mop. And they said, "Okay, Aunt Sandy, we'll collect some of these red rocks." But there were these rocks. You might call them like, I don't know what other color. Red, maybe a purple. And the kids started picking these rocks up, and Aunt Sandy said, "Put them in the pile over here." And the kids that had collected the skipping stone rocks started to be a hubbub. And Aunt Sandy said, "No skipping rocks until your aunt's down at the water line." And she said, "Okay, everybody that's going to skip rocks, I want you to line up." Now, at this point, the weather changing had become undeniable. There was like just a blackish, grayish streak on the horizon, and you could see the churning of the water. And the frequency, while the size of the waves hadn't changed, the frequency of the lapping against the shore had changed. And the air just felt, it did feel electric. It felt thicker. And Aunt Sandy said, "I want you to all to line up, and we're going to do some skipping." And they said, "Aunt Sandy, is a storm coming?" And she said, "Yeah, it is. A storm's coming right now. And, this is our final serving of our story tonight. So I want you to, when you skip a rock, you're going to say, 'Rain, rain, go away,' and then throw the rock. And then the amount of time, the equivalent of the number of skips will be how long we have before it starts raining." It's a proven Aunt Sandy method. And the kids started skipping, and the first kid went, And the rocks, and Sandy's like, oh, this 14 skips, that's really good. And they said, no, it's 16 skips because the last two. And Sandy said, okay, 16 skips. And then the next kid went, a younger kid, and only skipped 3. And he said, okay, 3 times, like 14. 16 plus 3 is 19. And then the next kid went, and it went 22. And Sandy went, okay, like 19 plus 22 is like 50. The kids were like, no. So, yeah, okay. And then next. And the next kid went, it was 9. And Sandy said, okay, 59. And the kids kept going, and Aunt Sandy kept messing up the math. And then the other kids came from collecting the red rocks. And then the thunder started, and you could see the line of rain getting closer. And Aunt Sandy said, okay, like, it's time we got to start cleaning the beach up. We got 98 seconds. And, of course, this one kid, Joey D, he was very good at math. He said, Aunt Sandy is 131. And that's seconds. So we have 2 minutes and 11 seconds to clean the beach. And she said, great. And so they started cleaning up the beach and collecting the things. And you lied there in the sand and watched. And then you were like, how did I miss it? The water had gone from lapping to crashing. The waves were now crashing. And then the pitter-pattering of the rain on water, you could still hear it even though the waves were crashing. Maybe it was in between the crashing of the waves. And then the wind picked up, and it started to sail and whistle between the leaves and the trees. And then it got even closer, and the kids were getting collected and heading up the stairs, and you'd almost not notice them heading off. As then the sand around you started to separate as water droplets pinged in and splashed among you. And you felt the air start to cool and release, like there was this tension that was starting to melt away. And you also could hear beneath all the wind and the rain and the waves, you could hear the children and Aunt Sandy, and they were lined up at one of those outdoor showers, and Aunt Sandy was saying, dig, 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 and dig your nails into that soap. Dig, dig, dig. And you could almost smell the ivory or the Irish Spring, whatever, non-European mass market soaps they had. And then you could hear the spray of the outdoor shower, and you could start to hear a screen door banging, open and closed. And you started to just close your eyes and to sink into that, to sink into the warmth of the sand around you and the coolness, the sharpness of the air, and then the collective body of all of your sandmates comforting you. And you were able to just take a storm in and let it drift by. And then you could still hear, I guess Aunt Sandy at that point broke character, but you heard him talking about Connect 4 and why don't we do readings from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and then somebody's parents saying that's a terrible idea. And you started to drift off as a thing of sand. And then you started to realize that a grain of sand has a multitude of experiences. Like one of the ones I think about is that a grain of sand gets to ride on bumblebee butts. Like if a bumblebee lands in sand, maybe it picks up some sand and it flies it around. And also, you're just saying bumblebee butts, so everybody that's here that can hear me is going to just start to mumble bumblebee butts and say bumblebee butts. And we're going to start to wake back up with bumblebee butts are going to bring you back to the room, bring you back to this Phoenix and Alameda. You're going to say bumblebee butts as you return. And just, when you're stressed, you could just say bumblebee butts. You could say, like, one time there was, and bumblebees are the ones that they're furry. Like, maybe the fur is nice when you're a grain of sand. So say bumblebee butts, and then start to take your hands, and you're going to do finger applause for yourselves. But also, like, this is the 13th show we've done here in this location. And so this is like a birthday party show for this. And so it wouldn't be a birthday party if I didn't have gifts. And so some of you have never been to a show, so I have some gifts for you. And then some of you have been to a multitude of shows, and I have gifts for you. So I'm going to start off with the new people. I started doing this live show like a year ago, and I performed at like 2 podcast conventions, and that's the only performance I've ever done in my life. And I was like, what am I getting myself into? And a couple people offered me encouragement and just said, keep doing it. But then at these live shows, people kept coming back, and we had a lot of help. And I couldn't do it without any of that. Like, I would have, like, if there wasn't familiar faces in the audience that come on a regular basis, I just couldn't have done it without those of you, and those of you that help. So, this is like, this is something I haven't done yet, and I'm only doing it. Right now, you will be the only people that are in this. But so there's this artist that used to live in Alameda who moved to Minneapolis, and he's very well known for doing these doors that you might see around Alameda or Oakland or other cities. And they're like a door, a window, and a welcome mat. And he usually works with other artists. So I emailed him. I said, like, what if we did these things I said, I have this idea for a dream door, because the podcast is really this interconnected thing, and it's not possible without the people that support it. And so I'm going to, at some point with the podcast, like, other people will be allowed into the Dream Door Society. But for now, all of you are going to be the founding members of the Dream Door Society. So, I'll announce everyone's names, but let's just give everybody that's helped here and comes on a regular basis a huge round of applause. And so you could put these up in your house, or you could put them up on the street. And the idea is that it's like a doorway to I guess it could mean whatever you want it to. I don't want it. So, Michael, thank you so much for all your help with all the shows in the back. And Leah, Michael and Leah have been here like since the beginning, helping out. Oh, that's you.
What? Oh, I can one?
Yeah. Sophia. Okay. So Lauren, this is Lauren's 3rd show. Thank you so much for coming. And Julie has been to 7 shows. And then Paul has been to 9 shows. And I was like, I figured if some of you have probably been to like, and Paul was even at a show where I think you were where I did a rehearsal show, and you might have been the only, yeah. So I couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you all for coming out. Thanks everybody that came out tonight for your first time. I did record the show.
All right, but it's time to talk about tonight's sponsor, Helix. As I tuck in, I gotta ask you, what kind of mattress are you being tucked into? Really, and how's your relationship with your mattress? Is it so good, like my relationship with my Helix is, that when you move, you're torn because you're gonna move some of your stuff, but you're gonna still live in your same place, so you can't ship your mattress when you're shipping your stuff. So you say to yourself, I'm gonna have to get another new mattress mattress for when I move. And then the great thing about Helix is that I could take the Helix quiz again, because maybe some of my sleep preferences have changed over the past 5-6 years. I'm sleeping more and more on my back than my side of my stomach. So I'm looking forward to taking the Helix quiz. You could take it. I mean, unless you have a perfect relationship with the mattress you're in, like it's based on your feel preferences, what you're looking for in a mattress, or was it what some salesperson, or was it a deal, whatever it was, or was it an intentional decision? Wow, this is a mattress that fits me and my needs, because that's why I'm looking forward to taking that Helix quiz coming up. And getting a brand new Helix to sleep in, because every time I go on the road, I can't wait to get back home, get in my Helix. It does fit my needs. It helps me sleep cool, helps me get comfortable, and it's part of my life, so much so that I don't want to be without my Helix mattress. So I think it's time for you to take that Helix quiz and find out which one of the many, many Helix mattresses fits your needs, your sleep preferences. You could get that mattress delivered right to your door. You could try it out. You can make sure it fits, make sure it works for you. So get over there and take that quiz. But I have even better news, right? Because Helix has got a great deal. So go to helixsleep.com/sleep for Labor Day sale early access and get 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/sleep for 20% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. And that's helixsleep.com/sleep. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Welcome to Bedtime Stories for Everyone, in which nothing much happens. You feel good, and then you fall asleep. I'm Catherine Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on Nothing Much Happens. Audio engineering is by Bob Wittersheim. We give to a different charity each week, and this week we are giving to the Alliance for the Great Lakes. They are a nonpartisan, nonprofit working across the region to protect our most precious resource, the fresh, clean, and natural waters of the Great Lakes. Learn more about them in our show notes. There is a whole team now behind the scenes at Nothing Much Happens. Folks who may not know you, but care very much about you. Care that you feel safe and relaxed, and that you get some sleep. Your kind messages are part of our regular meetings. Really, we text them to each other just to share in all the good feelings. You support us, give back to us just by rating and reviewing, listening and sharing the show. And certainly by subscribing to our premium feeds. Find links to join, as well as our wind down subscription box, all in our show notes. Now, I have a story to tell you. And just by listening, you'll begin to create a reliable response in your brain and nervous system. It's conditioning. Grown-up sleep training, and with time you'll notice yourself dropping off faster and returning to sleep more easily. Patience, if you're new here. I'll tell the story twice, and I'll go a little slower the second time through. If you wake later in the night, don't hesitate to turn a story back on, or to just think through any bits of the story that you can remember. Our story tonight is called Beach Day, and it's a story about cooling off by the water on a hot summer day. It's also about watermelon and the sloping, sandy lake bottom, getting everything from the car in just one trip a new book that you can't put down, pinwheels, and the magic of floating in the waves. Now, lights out, my dears. Please get as comfortable as you can. Arrange your pillows just the way you like them, and let your whole body relax into the mattress. You are exactly where you are supposed to be right now. Nothing is missing. Draw a deep breath in through your nose and let it out through your mouth. Again, fill it up and let it go. Good. Beach day. We were having a heat wave. The last 2 or 3 days had been sunny and cloudless, and today was no different. I'd been finding fun ways to manage it. I'd made root beer floats, which, if you haven't had one in a while, and I hadn't since I was probably 10 years old, I highly recommend. They are simply delicious. And the way the foam crackles from the fizzy soda and the ice cream coming together is really delicious. Another day, I took myself to the movies. The instant I'd stepped into the theater and let that cool, conditioned air sweep over me, I'd sighed from relief. I'd gotten a cold drink and some popcorn and sat in one of those fancy reclining seats and watched something silly that made me laugh till my sides hurt. I might have even snuck in a small nap at some point. And when the credits rolled, I'd left feeling truly refreshed, wondering if this was the summertime equivalent to a nice long steam in a sauna on a snowy day. Today, I decided, would be a beach day, and I was packing to be able to stay by the water for as long as I wanted. Admittedly, that took a bit of time, but I'd learned that it genuinely led to a better experience. I used to just grab a towel and a water bottle, but then went with a friend once who dutifully brought a sunshade, lounge chairs, and a stocked cooler, and had to admit they were better at beach than I was, and I'd learned my lesson. I started in the kitchen, packing cubed watermelon into a container and pulling a bag of pretzels down from the shelf. Something sweet and cold, something a little salty to help me stay hydrated. This was the perfect recipe, in my mind, for beach food. Now, I am not someone to yuck another person's yum, but I'd never had the desire to eat heavy, fried food in direct sunlight. When I went to the summer fair and smelled the curly fries and the funnel cakes, I never felt tempted to order them. I'd save that for a cool, crisp autumn day I fell into a daydream for a few moments as I let cold water run over my hands in the sink, thinking about corn stalks coated in frost and soft flannel shirts, and October evenings when you can see your breath in the air. I smiled to myself as I shut off the tap and dried my hands on a kitchen towel back in the bright summer moment. I filled a bottle with ice and water and lemon slices and added it to the cooler with my snacks and a cold pack. Already in my swimsuit and sundress, I started to load the car. I had a bag packed full of towels and sunscreen, a nice-sized umbrella, and a folding lounge chair with straps that allowed me to carry it like a backpack, ensuring I could almost certainly get everything from the car to the beach in one trip. At the last moment, I remembered my book, and thank goodness I did. My neighbor and I trade books all the time, and this one had been handed to me across the fence in our adjoining backyards the night before. He'd had a smug look on his face as he passed it over, saying, "You are going to love this. You are going to read it all in one day. Call me tomorrow and tell me I'm wrong. I dare you." I'd stuck my tongue out at his self-satisfied tone, but snatched up the book because he was usually right about such things. And when I'd sat down with it and my coffee this morning, intending to just flip through the first few pages, and accidentally read 3 chapters without stopping, I had to admit, he'd struck gold again. Now I grabbed it from the kitchen table and tucked it into my beach bags with my towels, and finally set off for the beach. There's a long, winding road that climbs a sandy dune on the way there, and I took it slow in case any deer were out. I didn't spot any. I guessed they were laying low in the heat as well, probably stretched out in some shady glen, napping through till evening. The beach was busy, and it took a moment to find a spot to park. But once I had, I was able to load up my arms with all the goodies and waddle out onto the sand. Though a lot of folks were out today, the beach was deep, with plenty of space. I claimed some and started to set up. Once my umbrella was open, I laid out an extra large towel and set my lounge chair on top of it. I settled in with my icy water bottle and my book, letting out a deep sigh. There was a breeze here by the water that had been absent at home, and it blew through my umbrella, making the shady space quite comfortable. At the blankets to my right, they'd stuck pinwheels into the sand, blue and white, and I watched them spin and listened to the waves rolling in. Lake water smells sweeter than ocean water. The missing salinity must be part of the recipe, but, I imagined, It was also the different plants, different life growing in and around the lake. I took a long drink of cold water and dove into my book, only coming up again when the heat had built enough to make a swim feel absolutely necessary. I tucked in my bookmark and climbed to my feet. Kids were running up and down the beach, filling buckets with water to carry to the moats around their sandcastles and racing friends. I remembered those days of meeting other kids and within minutes becoming friends and starting a game. Nothing mattered as much as play. I strolled down the sand, liking the way it slid under my feet. At the edge of the water, I eased my toes in and let out a little gasp as a wave crashed over my ankles. It was colder than I expected, but I chose to think of it as refreshing and inched further in. The kids who played in the shallows didn't seem to notice the chill, and I watched as a dad buckled his toddler into a swim vest. I had a sudden memory of my mom and me at the same beach when I was very little, her dunking a water wing in to make it easier to slide up my arm. Then me feeling the funny way they made my arms stick out from my sides when I was out of the water, and the buoyant bounce they gave me when I jumped in. I'd graduated from the water wings to a kickboard at some point, and by the time I'd gone to camp, I was a strong swimmer. I still like to do laps in a pool now and then, but today I just wanted to float about like an otter. The sandy bottom sloped away, and I ventured in until the water was up to my waist. I waited another moment, knowing that as soon as I dove all the way in, the cold would actually feel delicious, and I'd wonder why I'd hesitated. Then I took a deep breath and leaned into a coming wave, letting it lift my feet from the lake bottom. The cool water glazed over my shoulders, and I felt weightless and happy and began to swim. Beach day. We were having a heat wave. The last 2 or 3 days had been sunny and cloudless, and today was no different. I'd been finding fun ways to manage it. I'd made root beer floats, which, if you haven't had one in a while, and I hadn't since I was probably 10 years old, I highly recommend. They are simply delicious. And the way the foam crackles from the fizzy soda and the ice cream coming together is really delightful. Another day, I took myself to the movies. The instant I'd stepped into the theater and let that cool, conditioned air sweep over me. I'd sighed from relief. I'd gotten a tall, cold drink and some popcorn and sat in one of those fancy reclining seats and watched something silly that made me laugh till my sides hurt. I might have even snuck in a small nap at some point. And when the credits rolled, I'd left feeling truly refreshed, wondering if this was the summertime equivalent to a nice long steam in a sauna on a sunny day. Today, I decided, would be a beach day, and I was packing to be able to stay by the water for as long as I wanted. Admittedly, that took a bit of time, but I'd learned that it genuinely led to a better experience. I used to just grab a towel and a water bottle, but then went with a friend once who dutifully brought a sunshade, lounge chairs, and a stocked cooler, and had to admit they were better at beach than I was, and I'd learned my lesson. I started in the kitchen, packing cubed watermelon into a container and pulling a bag of pretzels down from the shelf. Something sweet and cold, something a little salty to help me stay hydrated. This was the perfect recipe, in my mind, for beach food. Now, I am not someone to yuck another person's yum, but I'd never had the desire to eat heavy, fried food in direct sunlight. When I went to the summer fair and smelled the curly fries and the funnel cakes, I never felt tempted to order them. I'd save that for a cool, crisp autumn day. I fell into a daydream for a few moments as I let cold water run over my hands in the sink, thinking about corn stalks coated in frost and soft flannel shirts and October evenings when you can see your breath in the air. I smiled to myself as I shut off the tap and dried my hands on a kitchen towel. Back in the bright summer moment, I filled a bottle with ice and water and lemon slices, added it to the cooler with my snacks and a cold pack. Already in my swimsuit and sundress, I started to load the car. I had a bag packed full of towels and sunscreen, a nice-sized umbrella, and a folding lounge chair with straps that allowed me to carry it like a backpack, ensuring I could almost certainly get everything from the car to the beach in one trip. At the last moment, I remembered my book, and thank goodness I did. My neighbor and I trade books all the time, and this one had been handed to me across the fence in our adjoining backyards the night before. He'd had a smug look on his face as he passed it over, saying, "You are going to love this. You are going to read it all in one day. Call me tomorrow and tell me I'm wrong. I dare you." I'd stuck my tongue out at his self-satisfied tone, but snatched up the book because he was usually right about such things. And when I'd sat down with it and my coffee this morning, intending to just flip through the first few pages, and accidentally read 3 chapters without stopping, I had to admit, he'd struck gold again. Now I grabbed it from the kitchen table and tucked it into my beach bags with my towels, and finally set off for the beach. There's a long, winding road that climbs a sandy dune on the way there, and I took it slow in case any deer were out. I didn't spot any. I guessed they were laying low in the heat as well. Probably stretched out in some shady glen, napping through till evening. The beach was busy, and it took a moment to find a spot to park. But once I had, I was able to load up my arms with all my goodies and waddle out onto the sand. Though a lot of folks were out today, the beach was deep, with plenty of space. I claimed some and started to set up. Once my umbrella was open, I laid out an extra large towel and set my lounge chair on top of it. I settled in with my icy water bottle and my book, letting out a deep sigh. There was a breeze here by the water, that had been absent at home. And it blew through my umbrella, making the shady space quite comfortable. At the blankets to my right, they'd stuck pinwheels into the sand, blue and white, and I watched them spin and listened to the waves rolling in. Lake water smells sweeter than ocean water. The missing salinity must be part of the recipe. But I imagined it was also the different plants, different life, growing in and around the lake. I took a long drink of cold water and dove into my book, only coming up again when the heat had built enough to make a swim feel absolutely necessary. I tucked in my bookmark and climbed to my feet. Kids were running up and down the beach, filling buckets with water to carry to the moats around their sandcastles, and racing friends. I remembered those days of meeting other kids, and within minutes becoming friends and starting a game. Nothing mattered as much as play. I strolled down the sand, liking the way it slid under my feet. At the edge of the water, I eased my toes in and let out a little gasp as a wave crashed over my ankles. It was colder than I had expected, but I chose to think of it as refreshing and inched further in. The kids who played in the shallows didn't seem to notice the chill, and I watched as a dad buckled his toddler into a swim vest. I had a sudden memory of my mom and me at this same beach when I was very little. Her dunking a water wing in to make it easier to slide up my arm. Then me feeling the funny way they made my arms stick out from my sides when I was out of the water, and the buoyant bounce they gave me when I jumped in. I'd graduated from the water wings to a kickboard at some point, and by the time I'd gone to camp, I was a strong swimmer. I still liked to do laps in a pool now and then, but today I just wanted to float about like an otter. The sandy bottom sloped away, and I ventured further in until the water was up to my waist. I waited another moment, knowing that as soon as I dove all the way in, the cold would actually feel delicious, and I'd wonder why I'd hesitated. Then I took a deep breath and leaned into a coming wave, letting it lift my feet from the lake bottom. The cool water glazed over my shoulders, and I felt weightless and happy, and I began to swim. Sweet dreams.
Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us at snoozecast.com, and if you enjoy our show, please share us with a friend. This episode is brought to you by Luscious Fruits. Tonight, we'll read the first Voyage from Sinbad the Sailor, edited by Lawrence Houseman and published in 1900. Houseman was a prolific English writer and playwright, an activist and an illustrator during the Victorian era. Turning from visual art to writing, when his eyesight began to fail, he also advocated tirelessly for the women's right to vote and believed that men should be an active participant of the suffrage movement. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to find our episode titled The Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor that aired on January 13th, 2020. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. In Baghdad, there was a rich merchant named Sinbad the Sailor, the source of whose wealth was a mystery. It seemed to be inexhaustible. For long seasons, he kept open house, and his entertainments were the most magnificent of all. All that riches could buy seemed at his disposal, and he lavished the good things of this life upon his guests. Pages, servants, and attendants there were in great number. His garden was spacious and beautiful, and his house was filled with every costly luxury. This Sinbad the Sailor has a story to tell, the story of his life, but he never told it to any until, one day, there came to him one Sinbad the landsman, a man of poor and humble birth. This man pleased him greatly with an apt recitation dealing with the widely different lots dispensed by God to men, and, being pleased, he was struck with the happy conceit that now Sinbad the sailor was at last confronted with Sinbad the landsman. It would be no bad thing were he to narrate the story of his life so that all might know his strange adventures and conjecture no longer as to the source of his fabulous wealth. Accordingly, Sinbad the sailor held 7 receptions on 7 different days, and, although on each occasion a multitude of guests were assembled to listen, he failed not to address his words from first to last to his simple listener, Sinbad the landsman. Following is his narration of the strange and wonderful adventures he experienced in his 7 voyages. The first voyage of Sinbad the sailor. My father was a merchant of high rank and rich possessions. He died when I was but a child, leaving me all his wealth. When I reached manhood's estate, I used my inheritance with no thought for the morrow, living in a sumptuous manner and consorting with the richest young men of Baghdad. I continued this life for many years until, at last, when reason prevailed with me to mend my plan, I found with dismay that I had sunk to poverty. And then it was that I arose and sold what goods remained to me for 3,000 pieces of silver, and girded myself, resolving to travel to other lands and rebuild my fortune by the wit of my mind and the labor of my hands. With a part of my hoard, I bought merchandise for exchange in far lands, and also such things as I should require in my travels. Thus prepared, I set sail with a company of merchants in a ship bound for the city of El Basra. For many days and nights we sailed upon the sea, visiting lands and passing thence to other islands. And everywhere we bartered and bought and sold. At length we came to an island unlike the others. It seemed like a garden that had floated from off the sides of paradise and established itself in the sea. And here our ship cast anchor, and we landed. Then fires were lighted, and while some cooks, others washed in the cool stream, and yet others amused themselves, admiring the beauties of the place. When all had eaten of the food prepared, the shore became a happy scene of sport and play, in which I engaged to the full. But suddenly, a cry from the master of the ship put an end to our gaiety. Standing at the side of the vessel, he called loudly, "Hear me, and may God preserve you. Hasten back and leave everything. Save yourselves, for this that ye think is an island is not such. It is a mighty fish lying entranced in sleep on the surface of the sea since times of old, and trees have grown upon it. But your fires and frolicking have awakened it, and lo, it moves. And if it sink into the sea, ye will assuredly be drowned. Hasten then, and save yourselves." At this we all, with one accord, left everything and fled for the ship, hoping to escape. While we were making for safety, the island moved with a great turmoil and sank behind us in the sea, and the waves leapt against each other above it. For a time I gave myself up for lost, for I was drawn down fathoms deep. But by God's grace, I rose again to the surface, and to my hand was one of the large wooden bowls which some of the passengers had taken on shore for the purpose of washing. This I seized and established myself in it, and thus combated the leaping waves, steadying myself with my hands and feet. In vain I called on the master of the ship. He heard me not. He had spread his sails and pursued his way, thinking that none beside those who had been taken up were left alive. Astride my wooden bowl, I gazed longingly at the ship until it was out of sight. Then I prepared as the night was closing around me. Perchance I swooned, for I remembered naught else until I found myself stranded upon a mountainous island. There were trees overhanging, and I grasped a drooping bough and drew myself up from the fretting wave. My limbs were benumbed, and, on looking at my legs, I saw the marks made by the nibbles of fish, and marveled at my salvation. Staggering forward, I flung myself high on the beach like one dead, and so I remained until the dawn of the next day, when the sun, rising upon me, woke me to a sense of such a condition as I had never known before. Long it was before I could rise to a sitting posture, and longer still before I could crawl on my hands and knees to a space of grass that was shielded from the sun. Thence, in time, I staggered till I came to a brook of which I drank, and strength returned to me. I found luscious fruits and ate of them, and drank again of the clear waters of the brook. And so I continued many days roaming the island and wondering at its beauties until I was strong again as before. And it chanced, as I took my way to and fro in the island, reveling in the sight of things that God had set there, that on a day when the sea was sounding loudly on the shore, I beheld something in the distance which excited my curiosity. It seemed like a wild animal of gigantic size, and as I approached, I feared it was some fabulous beast of the sea. But as I drew still nearer, I was overcome with amazement to see a beautiful mare standing high, with mane and tail floating on the breeze. She was tethered to a stake on the shore, and, at sight of me, she screamed loudly and stamped her forefeet on the sand. But ere I turned to flee, I beheld a man come forth from a cave nearby, and he ran after me, calling on me to give an account of my presence and of my place. Thereupon I laid my story before him, sparing no detail, even to the wooden bowl by means of which, and by the grace of God, I had come thither. Gladness seized him at my recital, and he took my hand, saying, "Come with me." He led me into his cave and set food before me. I ate and ate until I was satisfied, and, being at my ease, I repeated my story more minutely, and he wondered thereat. Then I said, "Thou hast the truth of my adventures upon the sea. Now I pray thee, O my master, to tell me how thou art, that thou dwellest hidden in a cave, while thy mare is tethered on the shore." He was in no way displeased at my curiosity, but answered me in plain words. "I am one of the grooms of the King Il-Majra," he said, "and the others are scattered about the island. For, look you, friend, it is the time of the new moon, when the sea-horse cometh up out of the sea, and it is our plan to bring our best mares hither and tether them by the shore, so that they may lure the sea-horses into our hands." While I was wondering at the manner of this cunning device, a magnificent sea-horse rose from the waves, shaking the foam from its crest and neighing loudly. As it approached, my companion drew me into the cave and placed himself at the opening with a long coil of thick cord in his hand. Presently, by means of this, he lashed the seahorse with great dexterity and fettered him. Then, with the mare and the seahorse, he led me to his companions, who, when they heard my story, were all of one mind that I should accompany them to the city of the king. So they mounted me on one of the mares, and I rode with them to the king's palace. As soon as we had arrived at the palace gates, they went in to the king and informed him of my strange adventures, whereupon he sent for me, and they led me before him. He greeted me very courteously and bade me tell him my story, which, when he had heard it, filled him with amazement, so that he cried, "By Allah, my son, of a truth thou art favored by fate, for how else couldst thou escape so great a peril? Praise God for thy deliverance." And he made much of me and caused me to be treated with honor, and he appointed me master of the harbor and comptroller of the shipping. My condition then was no longer that of a wayfarer. I rose day by day to a higher and a higher place in the king's favor, and he took me into his council in all affairs of state. For a long time I served him well, and he ceased not to recompense me with a liberal hand. Yet my thoughts turned ever to Baghdad, the abode of peace. But when I inquired of merchants and travelers and masters of ships in which direction it lay, and how one might come at it, they one and all shook their heads at the name of the strange city of which they had never heard. At last, weary of the wonders of that island and the sea around it, wonders the which, if I had time to tell you, would cause you the greatest amazement, wearied, too, with my arduous duties, but most of all with my prolonged absence from my own land, I stood one day on the seashore when a great ship drew near and a number of merchants landed from it. The sailors brought forth their merchandise, and, when I had made an account of it, I inquired of the master of the ship if that were the whole of his cargo. "All, O my master," he replied, "all save some bales whose owner was drowned on our voyage hither, but even these, being in my charge, I desire to sell on behalf of his family in Baghdad." "Sayest thou so?" I cried. "Tell me, I pray thee, the name of the owner of these goods." And he replied, "His name was Sinbad the sailor, and he was drowned on our way hither." When I heard this, I regarded him more closely and recognized him. Then I cried out, "O my master, I am he, and they are my goods that are in thy hold." But he neither recognized me nor believed my words, whereupon I narrated to him the history of my supposed death. But he shook his head and called upon Allah to witness that there was neither faith nor conscience in any. "Look you," he said, "thou heardst me say the owner was dead, and therefore thou desirest the goods for thyself free of price. I tell thee we saw him sink into the sea with many others." "O my master," I answered, "hear me and then judge of my veracity." With this I narrated to him many trivial things which happened before we reached the great fish island, and which could never be known to me had I not been on the ship. And then it was that he and many of the merchants regarded me with fixed looks and recognized me. "By Allah," said they one and all, "we truly believed thee drowned, but here we find thee alive." And they pressed upon me and congratulated me, and the master of the ship gave me my goods, at sight of which I was overjoyed, and they all rejoiced with me. Mindful of the king I served, I at once opened my bales and, selecting the most costly articles, went in to him and laid them at his feet, telling him how I had regained the goods of which they were a part. And the king wondered greatly at my good fortune and graciously accepted my gifts. He also showed me great favor and honor in that he bestowed upon me gifts in return for mine. Then, having sold my remaining goods at a profit, bought largely of the merchandise of the city, and, when the ship was about to sail, I approached the king and thanked him for the great kindness to me, and humbly begged his leave to depart to my own city and family. So he gave me his blessing and a great wealth of merchandise and rare commodities, and bade me farewell. And soon thereafter, having stowed all my goods in the hold of the ship, I set sail with the others for Baghdad. Our voyage was fortunate, and, with the aid of favorable winds, we reached the city of El-Basra in safety. Thence I repaired to Baghdad, and my family and my friends gave me a joyous welcome. And when I had sold my merchandise, I set up a large establishment, sparing no cost. And I bought land and houses, and gathered round me wealthy companions, in whose society I soon forgot how I had suffered in other lands. Such is the story of my first voyage. And tomorrow, by God's grace, I will narrate to you the strange adventures of my second voyage.